Okay, you're good to go.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I gotta hit the little got it. Yes, welcome to the November session of part 2 of the Your Mind at Work program. Today, we're going to be talking about prioritizing and decision making. So taking some of the things that Pete talked about last week in terms of how the brain works and applying it specifically, giving some tips and strategies and the opportunity to talk about, what's working for people. So last week, Pete talked about how the brain uses energy, and setting priorities and making decisions are things that use an awful lot of energy. He talked, there's the prefrontal cortex. He talked about a whole bunch of brain stuff. I am taking that. Sorry, it keeps moving things on top of my screen, moving things on top of things. I had to move boxes around. So I'm going to take those concepts and, my sessions, we always apply it to, okay, so what on earth does that mean for me when I am at work? How do I help my brain when it is at work? And today it's prioritizing and making decisions at work. So we'll be talking about those two pieces. Last time, Pete talked about 5 key activities in the prefrontal cortex and what your brain needs to do. The 5 important things it needs to understand facts and ideas. And he gave an example. So a new idea, it might be reading an email. He talked about, I think her name was Anna, talked about a person who comes to work and she has so many things suddenly on her plate. So she needs to get her work done and figure out what she needs to do. There is deciding. The brain needs to make decisions. And in this example, it could be responding to an email. What do I say to the person in response to their questions to me? Recalling, the brain needs to recall facts, bring back memories, pull from long-term memory back in, up to short-term memory, so you can access it. And in Pete's example, talked about, thinking about previous training that this individual had taken on how to write effective emails. There's memorizing, that the brain needs to work on retaining information. And part of that is in Pete's examples, like, I have an idea, but then, oh, yeah, what was that idea again? The idea, before you can get it down, the idea can suddenly disappear again. And then inhibiting or not getting distracted. So controlling the distractions. And in the example Pete gave, those are the accidental deletion of an email because she was distracted doing too many things at once. And so Pete also talked about how, in summary, every time the brain works and it's, processing an idea, it's doing any one of those 5 steps, it's going to use a lot of energy. And this is why, even if you're sitting at your desk all day and you're thinking and you're writing emails, or, you're in meetings and talking, you're thinking hard, you get tired because you are depleting your energy significantly. And some things take more energy than others. Reading a book for pleasure is probably going to be easier than reading a physics textbook, for example, right? Just because of how deeply you need to think. And prioritizing is something that takes a lot of energy. So we're going to be talking today about concepts around prioritizing, decision-making, and it's going to flow in next month when we're talking, I'll be talking more about time management. So you will really want to come in December as well and take everything from the 2 sessions together, because there's going to be a lot there to help you in total. So prioritizing is part of time management. Number 1 principle of time management: the things that matter most must never be at the mercy of the things that matter least. So understanding what is important to you is what is important. So prioritizing, I like to split it down into 3 pieces. You need to decide what to do, you need to decide how to do it, and you need to decide when to do it. Okay, and those are the 3 pieces that will come together. So on prioritizing, to decide what to do, it's really, be clear on what you want and why you want it. And I have the visual of a target here with all the arrows in the middle of the target. There's a lot of, I'm going to touch a bit on what Pete talks mostly about the brain chemistry and brain science. I'm going to touch a little bit without going into the details. There's research that shows that If a goal is too easy or if a goal is too hard, then the brain isn't going to release the right chemicals and operate at optimum efficiency in order for you to accomplish the goal. If it's too easy, you're not going to be motivated because it's like, well, that's so easy. I can do that with my eyes closed. You don't have the motivation to do the work. And so you may not accomplish the goal because it's too easy. If it's too hard, you can be demotivated and your brain is saying, there is no way I'm going to do that. I just can't accomplish that. And so then you don't try. So figuring out what is, for goals that has just the right amount of challenge. It's not impossible and it's not super easy, but it's stretching. And so that gives you that little extra nudge and gets the brain working at optimum efficiency for accomplishing your goals. So when you are deciding what to do, okay, you've got, you've shown up for work and you have all the things that you thought you were going to do today. And, now there's, however many more emails and your boss is calling and your colleague has said, hey, can I have a minute? And just so much going on. As you look at the list of things and you're trying to prioritize what should I focus on at all and what should I focus on at first, ask yourself, do I need to do this task at all? When you look at a task, do I need to do it? Do I need to do it? Could someone else do it? Is there the opportunity that someone else could do it? Okay, thank you, Chantel. So can I get it off my plate? Okay. And ask yourself, what happens if no one does this task? What happens if I don't do it? Is there a really big negative consequence if I don't do it? Or is it, maybe no one will care. If doing it is going to lead to a really huge positive consequence, that makes it more important than something that has just a small positive consequence when you do it. So asking yourself these questions can help you figure out what goes closer to the top of the list and what goes to the bottom of the list. And linking it back to what's important to me. What are my goals? What do I want out of my career, my job? What are the goals I'm committed to? Another question you can ask yourself is, okay, I'm going to do these. I've got 10 tasks. Let's say I know I need to do them. Do I need to do them all perfectly? Do I need to get, a 10 out of 10 on them? Can some of them be done at a 50% level or an 80% level? And so deciding yes or no, and then for the yeses, how well do you choose to do it, helps you prioritize. Well, I can actually only need to do a 50% job, and that's going to take me 30 seconds. Well, let me just get that off my plate. And then you can cross it off the list, right? So that can help you make sure you're focused on putting your effort and energy into the things that are most important to you. Most people are familiar with the urgency versus importance grid. But I'm going to walk through it because this is something that can really help you when you have so many things. I have done this myself, and I know I have clients where they have actually taken a piece of paper and they've drawn the grid and they've labeled it important to not important, urgent to not urgent. And then you put your tasks and you decide how important and how urgent are they, or unimportant and unurgent, and you plot them on the grid. Anything that's in the top right quadrant is both urgent and important. So those are things that you really should be thinking about working on first.
Jane, that we use this at Next Dimension literally every morning. Our operations team, meets at 9 o'clock every morning, and the whole team is on the line, and we literally go through the what's important, what's urgent, what's important, not urgent, what's urgent, not important, and we do a has to do today, schedule, and delegate, and it works for the whole team because everybody's online. Yep. And then it gets circulated to the entire business so that everybody can see what the operations priorities are today.
Because that's awesome, Pete. Thank you. It's so good to hear that it's working for a team in a larger company, that not just for one individual doing it, but it works broadly. And then sharing it, the key thing there is so everybody knows what the operations team is working on. And if something that they see as a priority is, in that bottom left quadrant, for example, they need to know that, because like, I guess I'm not going to get what I need from the operations team. And then they have to figure out what they're going to do about it. Right. But rather than sitting saying, well, why haven't they done what I needed them to do? They know, okay, it's not going to happen, or they know it is going to happen. And it's the priority for today. And that can significantly help with smoothing the operations. It makes conversations and discussions and meetings and everything easier because it's managing expectations. That's really cool. I'm so glad to hear that, Pete. Thank you. So yeah, so it's, that top left quadrant. These are the things that are important. They are not urgent. And I want to add the word, they're not urgent yet, because if you don't work on them and start making progress, they will become urgent. And we all know that when we work on something that is urgent, then that urgency, you're rushing, you get stressed, you don't always do as good a job as needs to be done. You might miss details, you might make mistakes. Whereas if you can work on something over a bit longer time when you're not stressed, then you can make better progress on it. And yes, Laura, you have your hand raised.
Sorry, I'm interrupting.
But
I just picked up on, you said the urgent and important needs to be done first. But for me, like I've lived with this for probably 30 years, right?
Yeah.
I call it sandbagging in firefighting, right?
Yeah.
And I actually focus on the important, not urgent in terms of scheduling, because the other stuff does interrupt and get done, So in some sense, I prioritize the important, not urgent more, because I commit to doing it. You know what I mean?
That's that's exactly. And that's like, Pete said, you schedule those, and that's exactly where this is going. Exactly. Yeah. And I like your language of sandbagging and firefighting. Yeah. Thank you. That's
if you don't sandbag, then you're only firefighting, right? Like the fire.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And so, because the reality is anything you put above the line is important, and you need to figure out when you're going to do it, how you're going to get it done. Anything that you put below the line, you're saying it's not important. Now, if it's not important and not urgent, it's kind of like it's in the red box, right? Some things are not important, but they are urgent, and you will find ways to do them. And so this is then exactly what, Pete and Lori both have been saying. The things in the top right quadrant, they're important, they're urgent, you need to do them. And you're going to focus on making sure those get accomplished in that day. The top left quadrant, you need to schedule the time, and you want to make sure you have time in your calendar on a regular basis. And depending on your role and what you're working on, it might be every single day. You want to make sure you have blocked out time, scheduled time to work on those projects, or it might be once a week, you take a half a day or something. You have to figure out what works for you, but you need to make sure you are working on those so that they do not become urgent, and so that you are doing it's not all firefighting, right? Because as you say, Lori, firefights, they're going to come in and interject, and you're going to have to deal with them. On the bottom, if it's not urgent, not important, you might want to consider just completely crossing it off the list.
Well, I thought that was watching cat videos on Facebook. What we say is, if it's not urgent, not important, why is it even on the list?
Exactly. Yeah. And it feels good to cross things off the list, either because you've completed them, or because it's like, I'm never going to have to do this, right? Take it off the list. And Pete, you also said, that one quadrant, the urgent, not important, can you delegate? And thinking about, the quality, how good a job, not that we're ever going to, we don't want to do a poor job, but sometimes a 50% or an 80% is good enough, right? That's all that's actually needed. And so really using that kind of approach there is helpful. And so above the line, these are priorities. Below the line, they are not priorities. And also, whenever you're sitting there thinking, oh, what shall I work on next? Ask yourself, what is the most valuable use of my time right now? What is the one thing that I could do that will make the biggest difference in me accomplishing my personal / professional goals, in me helping the company accomplish their goals? And this one question by itself, I have found really helpful, because there's plenty of times when I've gone, well, this will be more fun, I'd rather do that. But I asked this question, it's like, no, I need to.
Can I just add a little bit to that though, Jane?
Of course, please.
What is the most valuable use of my time right now, given my current level of energy?
Yes. And because I'm going to be talking about energy in a minute. And so that's, I'm writing that down because I want to add that to the slide. Thank you.
I didn't mean to throw you a loop, but
No, you're right on, Pete, because because you might be in a position where the most valuable use would be to do some incredibly complicated project. But you know what? I got no sleep last night, and I'm fighting, the flu, and I just cannot physically do that level of work. I physically, energetically cannot do that level of work. So I like that addition, Pete.
Yeah, that's me most days of the week, by the way.
That you can or cannot? You cannot?
I've just got no energy.
Yeah. We'll have to talk about that separately. So in prioritizing, part of prioritizing is also deciding how to do it. So that's a little bit of the, can we get away with a 50, is 50% sufficient? Is 80% sufficient? But it's having a plan how to complete the work. And sometimes the priority is a huge mammoth project and you're going, I just can't do that. But the how to do it could be to break it into small chunks. So, well, today I can do step 1, or I might be able to do step 1 and step 2. So it allows you to make progress and get started on that huge project. And breaking things down into smaller pieces is one of the most amazing ways to make progress on something. You don't decide, oh, I'm going to run a marathon, and you go out tomorrow and run a marathon if you've never run before. You start by, okay, maybe I'm going to walk fast. Maybe, I'll do I run for a minute, walk for a minute, and then I run for 2 minutes, and I run, right? And you build it up. It's small steps. So think about that as you're looking at the work. Can you prioritize 1 or 2 steps of a whole project and just get those done that day? And there are so many possibilities, right, of things that you can do. You could always put more things on your list. So think about, instead of creating a to-do list, consider creating a not to-do list. So the first thing to go through, instead of saying, oh, what should I do today? Go through and say, what are all the things I can take off my plate for today? Doesn't mean you're saying no forever to all of them. You might decide to say no forever to some of them, right, from the discussion earlier. But some of them you might say, okay, I don't actually have to do this till next week, so I'm going to move it to next week's list. It's a not due today list. And in terms of language, it's also, it's not prioritizing, but it's prioritizing away. And sometimes that can simplify things. The not to do list, the prioritize away, then gives you a list that you can look at and go, oh, you know what? Now this is an easier thing to look at. And let me just, okay, this is first and this is second. And this is when I'm going to do them in my day and fit it in amongst meetings. Okay. Another concept is eat that frog. There's a Mark Twain saying about, if the worst thing you have to do is in any given day is eat a frog, eat it right away. And then you've done the worst thing for that day. And then the rest of the day is good. So for many people, eating the frog, doing the task that they absolutely really, really don't want to do, is the way that they can get that done. And then the rest of the day is relatively easy because it is tasks that they enjoy more. So deciding when to do it, we're going to talk about the energy. It's really understanding yourself and when you are at your peak levels of performance. And so I've got the little graph, because one way to do this is to take a week or so and track your ultradian rhythms, not your circadian rhythms, but your ultradian rhythms. That's how your energy goes over the course of a 24-hour period. So track your mood, your energy levels, your motivation, how focused you are in 15-minute increments. And what were you doing at that time? And what might have been going on around you? And this task is not fun. I will be honest and say, you know what? It takes a bit of work. I've done it and it's really helpful. So instead of me saying, well, you know, I think I'm productive at 2 p.m, I have data to say, you know what? Actually, I'm only productive at 2 p.m if I have taken a proper lunch break. Then I'm really productive at 2 p.m. But if I had a lunch meeting, then at 2 p.m, I have no energy, no computing power left in my brain left. So tracking it, look for trends, then helps you to figure out, okay, when am I going to do that sandbagging work, right? This is when I need to do that deep work, because this is when I'm in a prime state, physically, mentally, emotionally, to do the work. And so you prioritize the work you're going to do and when you're going to do it based on how you're feeling. High attention tasks, you do it when you have a lot of attention. When you're tired and exhausted, you know then, okay, now I can do some low attention tasks, and figuring out which tasks require high attention or low attention for you. Okay. And setting a meeting with yourself and some time when, you know, blocking out that time in your calendar that this is when I'm going to do the work, and then thinking of yourself as your most important client and protecting that work time with yourself as the most important time. And I realize the reality is that, you know, there'll be times when you do need to cancel the meeting with yourself. But quite often someone will ask for your time and you say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not available at 2 o'clock. I have another meeting. They don't need to know the meetings with you, with yourself, to do work. So you have another meeting and they go, oh yeah, fine. I'm fine to talk tomorrow at 10. Okay. Right. And so having that routine and having scheduled work time, and, you know, like when do you eat your meals? Do you eat healthy meals? When do you exercise? Things like that. Understanding how all of those things impact your energy level are helpful. Okay. Any questions on prioritizing before we switch to the decision-making piece?
Jane, one of the things I was going to say on the prioritizing bit, and it kind of comes back to something that Pete was saying when they meet as an actual team together and kind of go through things. I think sometimes within your own team, if and it was kind of the one that you were talking about before about eating the frog, is I think there's times too, especially if you're working on a project together from a team, is, you know, that, you know, somebody enjoys doing something more than you do.
Yeah.
And I guess it comes to the delegation of things, but this is when you can kind of prioritize tasks or set things out as well and sort of say, hey, this is the best. And then I know even, this is a bit of what Pete had said. I know even in my husband's business, he got a brand new team that he's been working with. And the one guy was just like, he was doing everything first in, you know, first in, first out.
Yeah.
And he was like, my husband had to change their way of thinking because it was the prioritizing. This is the most important. So when you see that come in, you've got to drop such and such and then come back to it because it's what the business needs.
Right.
And I think that's one of the key elements too, is what does the business need and how does the business operate from that? I mean, obviously, if you're looking at it from a personal perspective, it's different things.
Yeah. And you know, different roles require different levels of responsiveness to external events. If you're in a customer service role, when the customer calls, that's your priority, right? As it versus you might be also writing an SOP for something. It's like, but no, when the customer calls and needs service, you have to serve them. So it does depend on what the business needs, what your role is exactly.
Yeah. And one of the other things I always find too with some of these things is I know never to do something towards the end of the day when you know you're going to go, even if it's a small task, because it's that Murphy's Law. You know, everything's going to crash and nothing's going to work and, you know, everything comes unraveled. So those are some of those things, especially if it's not totally important. Okay, that can be done to the next day.
Yeah, so. Exactly. Yeah. So sometimes cramming in a little task. Oh, excuse me, I'll just get this done.
Yeah. It always goes awry.
It.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Excuse me. So
another point before we move on. I think people forget too, priorities change.
of course,
Right.
yes.
So
Yes, good point. Oh,
sometimes
yeah.
it's appropriate to stop doing something that was a priority, and a lot of people hang on to things.
I have been at times remarkably fortunate in what I have chosen to procrastinate on, because I procrastinated
good.
and then, you know what? I don't actually need to do this anymore. I'm so glad I didn't spend a whole day last week working on this.
Yeah.
Right.
I-
And sometimes it
actu-
doesn't work. So you have to, right.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but,
And
so,
and actually, I think it was Chantel and Sherry. It may have been Sherry last week who
Yep.
kind of shared the story of, kind of going, hey, in reality, like, you're not going to get that task done. So just put it off to tomorrow when they had a one-on-one meeting. Sherry, I could be totally wrong
that's
that it
right.
was
That's
you.
yes, that's I remember that story. Yes.
Actually, it was our boss, Heather, who had
Okay.
mentioned with Chantel. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Exactly.
and that's it. And sometimes being realistic with your team is understanding, okay,
Yeah.
I know it's a priority, but based on everything you've done today,
Yeah.
and I think that helps build the culture of your team too.
Yeah. And so if you're in a culture where you can have those discussions with your team, with your manager, and Pete gave, examples, like clearly they've set that culture at Next Dimension, right? And so, yeah, so if Heather was saying, you know what, you're not going to be able to, like, you're not going to be able to do all this. So put that to tomorrow. That is very freeing for the individual who's been told, yeah, they've been officially given permission to not do this. And ask questions. You're given more and more work. Say, okay, well, to add all of this, what do I need? What can I take off? I need to take something off. Yeah. And learn how to have those discussions. Okay.
I just had a quick question,
Yeah.
Sarika. So recently, it's been about a year, got into this manager role, and I find that if I sit down to make this list and prioritize, I spend way too much time on it, and then next thing you know, it's like 10 o'clock or 10:30, and now I've got a meeting to go to, and that entire list that I created has gone out the window. Any advice on how other people in this position do it? Do you do it the night before? Do you come in before 9 and do it?
It works for some people. Doing it the day before, taking 5 minutes at the end of the day before they completely shut down and saying, okay, these are the key things I need to work on tomorrow. Then they come in and they've got the list and they can jump in and recognize that things will change. For other people, it does help to do it first thing in the morning when their brain is fresh, because they're more awake, they have the energy and they can think more clearly about, oh yeah, this really is the priority. We'll be talking more in December in terms of time management about planning and how to get in a rhythm of regular planning. If you are planning regularly, if you're taking your annual goals and breaking them down into quarterly milestones, okay, and then these are the action things I need to do in January, and these are the action steps I need in February. And in January, week by week, you're saying, okay, these are the priorities. I'm an engineer, so I like processes. Okay. So this is how I run my life, my business. It does not take me an hour. It takes me 3 or 4 minutes, because I have all of the things. These are the things I need to do. So these are the things I need to do in November, and these are the things that are important in the first week. And so every day it's like, okay, these are the couple of things I absolutely must get done. If you're creating a list for the day that has more than 5 or 6 things on it, then your list is too long. It's going to be too long, and you won't get them. You'll be spending more time creating the list. So thinking about what are the 2, maybe 3 things I absolutely must get done today. And then here are some nice to get, the nice to get dones, if that's what you call them. But doing it just as a 5-minute thing and no more than 5 minutes. Because if you're spending more time than that, then you're thinking too hard about, oh, well, is this more important? Is that more important? There's a certain amount of intuition and gut that can go into, yeah, you know what, this is what I need to do. Does that help?
It does. Yes. Thank you. I think the key, what I got from it, is that I have to do a lot of planning and be prepared.
It's,
I think,
yeah,
yeah.
I know it does. It sounds like
Yeah.
a lot. Once you get in the rhythm, it's
Right.
literally, I spend, maybe 10 minutes on a Friday at the end of the day to confirm what I need to do each week. And I'm spending 2 or 3 minutes each morning because I've gotten in the habit, and I've
Mhm.
created, when I did my annual plan and when I do a
Mhm.
quarterly check-in, I spend a bit longer on each of those. So, and we'll
Yeah.
talk more about this next
Yeah.
time. So hopefully you can join me in
Makes
December.
sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. And when you get Kelly sends out the slides, there's my email on the slides at the bottom. You'll see, if anyone wants to reach out, if you got questions, just send me an email. Make sure I know who you are. Like, I mean, I know I have all your names, so if I'll recognize your name, right? But just as like, oh, I have a question about prioritizing or whatever, from the Tech Connects group. And I'll get back to you, and we can, and I can answer your questions. Okay. So just want to throw that out there. Okay, let's move on to decision making. So I'm just, yeah, okay. So decision making, it's, we have a lot of choices, and sometimes the decisions are linked to prioritizing, right? But I also wanted to talk a bit about decision making in general. When you are, you might be choosing different features to offer, or choosing which car to buy, whatever. There are so many really thick books on this. I've not read them all. But I just wanted to talk about, a few concepts to give you a bit of an idea as you're making decisions, some things you may not have considered to bring into account when you're making decisions. We like mental models. So when we're making decisions, if we can build a model, then that can help us to visually see the options and visually compare them. So depending on what kind of decision you're needing to make, think about, what kind of structure you can give. And of course, if you have a low risk decision, if the consequences of a bad decision are low, then you don't need too many people. Excuse me. You don't need very many people on the team to make the decision. You don't need as much data. You can use more intuition, because if you get it wrong, it's not as big a deal. High risk decisions, you want more input from others. You want to talk to more experts, make sure you have all the data and information, and rely less on intuition. When thinking about approaching decisions, there are a couple of biases. There are a lot more biases if you get really deep into this, but there are a couple of biases I want to make sure that you understand. There's confirmation bias, where you really only hear the good things about something that you kind of like already. So, an example is, you've got a team and there's a person you like on the team and a person that you don't like so much on the team. They can be acting and behaving and delivering the same results, but you are more likely for the person that you personally like and get along with and you joke around with, you are more likely to cut them some slack, to justify them, give them a break, and look for all of the good things they've done. The person you don't like as much, you're more likely to look for the negative about them. And, oh, well, they made a mistake on that and they didn't deliver that there. And so confirmation bias is, you're looking for data to confirm a gut feel, and your gut may be wrong. Okay. So being aware of that as you are evaluating options, so that you can say, okay, I've got something here, and I'm, I am only looking for the positives. So let me try and think of all the negatives about this option. And let me try and think all the positives about the option that I'm not as much in love with, because that can help you see a clearer picture. Excuse me, sorry. I think I must be coming down with something. The other bias to be aware of is recency bias. And this is when you prefer or you like the most recent option presented. So if you're choosing between A, B, and C, and you hear a little bit of detail about all of them, C was presented last, it's the one you remember the best. You can't remember everything you heard about option A. And so you will tend to prefer option C just because it's the one that's taking up more of your short-term memory. And so being aware and saying, okay, let me look again at option A a little bit, and let me remind myself about option B, and making sure that you haven't forgotten something important about one of those options. Okay. And this is I did market research for many years, and we would randomize. So when you're sending out a survey, some people would see ABC, some would see ACB, BAC, that every option would go out there, and you'd have a portion of the population seeing the options in different orders to eliminate that recency bias. And it's been proven that it's a real thing. Okay. And here's a framework, and this, will probably, people will say, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense. It's, and this is used quite effectively, often in making decisions. It's, you list all the possible solutions or options when you make a decision. We can do A, we can do B, we can do C. But make sure you also include the option of not making a decision or doing nothing, because that is a valid option. And sometimes that is the right choice, at least for the time being. And so be clear on the timeline required. Do we need to decide this today? Is this something, that's urgent and we must decide today? Or is it something where we have a few days to decide, or it might be an even longer term decision? And what happens if you miss the deadline? Okay, you think you need to decide today. Well, what if it's 10 o'clock tomorrow morning? And that would allow us to get much better quality data, so we can make a better quality decision by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Is that going to be okay to do that? So that gives you the opportunity to get more information. Make sure you know who is responsible for making the decision. Make sure they know they're responsible for making this decision. And on teams, sometimes it's the leader, sometimes it's someone else, sometimes it's someone outside the team. Make sure you understand the important factors to consider. So what are all the criteria that we need to look at? Get the data that you need, understand the level of risk associated with the different decisions, and looking at, if we do this and it works out badly, it might have a really highly bad negative consequence, but that negative consequence has a really low chance of happening. Something else might have a less negative consequence, but a higher chance that you're going to have a negative consequence. So understanding what those are is data that you can bring in, because that can influence the decision that you make as well. Listing out pros and cons of options is helpful. Get them on paper, bring in experts, talk about the pros and cons, make sure you've covered everything and that you've covered all the important factors. Sometimes people will come up with nice fancy spreadsheets. They'll give weights, that the financial factors is 10 out of 10 and the people factors an 8 out of 10, and something else, speed to market is a 5 out of 10. They give weights, they give scores, and they come up with a number. If you just look at that number and say, therefore we do option A, that can be a little bit dangerous, because it takes the intuition out and it takes the complexity of the decision out. And you want to simplify decisions, but decisions are fundamentally complex. And so going through an exercise like this and having a spreadsheet can be very helpful as one piece of information as you make the decision, but don't let a spreadsheet decide for you. Because sometimes you look at that and go, you know what, that just doesn't feel right. And then you go back and realize you had the weightings wrong. Oh, we gave this an 8 out of 10, but it's really maybe only 6 out of 10, and the 6 is the 8, and then you get a different answer. So you need to take, the spreadsheet approach. It can be helpful to help you see some things, and it's a helpful process to go through, but it's not the be all and end all of making decisions. When you have a lot of factors to consider, one thing you can do is reduce the dimensionalities. So dimensionalities are the number of things that you're looking at. You're looking at pricing, you're looking at the impact on the people, you're looking at speed to market, you're looking at, what are all those pieces that you need to consider. So eliminate the things that you don't care too much about, or that are the same across all the options. So if you are looking to buy a car and you've got 3 that you're looking at, if they're actually all the same price, then just actually, take that consideration off the table, because it is irrelevant. Or if color does not matter to you, then don't consider it, because you'll take a car in any color, whatever's available, right? It's, oh, whatever's available fastest, or whatever's available with the features that are important that I want. This can simplify it for you if you know that you haven't even written down the factor, because it's not important, so don't put it on the piece of paper. You can also create what's called a threshold dimension. So this is something where you need a certain amount of it, but it doesn't matter. If something has more of it, it does not give more points to that. So you're buying a house, as long as it has 2 bathrooms, you're happy. The house that has 3 bathrooms doesn't get more points because it has 3 bathrooms, because you only want and need 2. The house with 3 bathrooms might have other things going for it that are more important, right? You might want 4 bedrooms and one of the houses only has 3. Well, okay, well, if I want 4, I take the one with 3 bedrooms off the plate, right? That's out of consideration. So understanding when there are things that it's like, okay, as long as it has this much of something, it doesn't matter if it has more. Again, this is simplifying the amount of data and information your brain is trying to process. Okay. And then there is, you know, yes, you want to, if there's some weighting, some you know, some things really are much more important than others. If the price is twice as important as the color, or 10 times more important than the color, understanding that, and your brain can then balance those out. So this can help you if you can eliminate some of the factors that you need to consider when you're making a decision. It can make the decision easier, because sometimes it will eliminate some options for you. It's like, oh, you know what? Actually, those aren't valid options. Take them away. And you're looking at fewer pieces of information when you need to make a decision, which can make it easier for you. A couple of other things. As you're gathering data and evaluating options, do what's called a pre-mortem exercise, not a post-mortem, but the pre-mortem. So imagine, you know, it's 6 or 12 months into the future. You decided to do option A, and you know what? 6 months later, it's not working out. Okay, what went wrong? What isn't working out? What might we have missed when we were considering option A? And then you do that exercise for option B. This is a way to get you to recognize various pros and cons that won't come up simply by saying, oh, well, these are the pros and these are the cons, because it's thinking it from a future perspective, and it gets a different part of the brain working and clicking it. It also can be a lot easier to make decisions for other people, right? You know, it's like, well, if I were in your shoes, I would do this. Okay, well, I'm in my shoes. What do I do? So in a personal context, it's asking yourself, okay, what would I tell my best friend to do in this situation? Or what would I tell a family member to do? It's remove yourself and look at the situation from the outside. In the professional context, say, okay, if I was let go, if I was fired, or if I quit, and someone new was brought in and had to make this decision, what decision would they make? And just that different perspective from looking at it from the outside can help you. And there's a really good example of this when Intel was only did memory, and they were evaluating should they expand into processors and all sorts of things and change their business model. They agonized over this decision because they were known for memory. That's what the company was built on. They agonized over this decision for at least a year. And then one day, it was like the president, the CEO, they're talking, and one of them said, well, what would happen if we were both fired and they hired someone else in our jobs? What decision would they make? And it was like, the answer was immediate. We'd get out of memory and we'd change. Okay, well, let's fire ourselves, walk out of the room, come back in as new people and make that decision. And Intel made that decision. But they needed to let go of all the emotional, right? They were emotionally attached to Intel does memory. They were emotionally attached to that, and they needed a new person wouldn't be. It's like, okay, get the emotion out of it, and you make the business decision. Asking yourself, what's the worst thing that could happen if I do A? The worst thing if I could do B? The worst thing that could happen if I do C? And what's the implications of that? Because that might take one of the options off the plate for you. Again, it's simplifying what you need to consider. And is the decision reversible? And how easily reversible is it? if a decision is easily reversible, then you may not want to stress too much. It's just like, okay, well, let's go do this. If it doesn't work out, okay, we'll go do the other thing, right? If it's not reversible, then that's when you want to make sure that you're thinking more carefully. So these are a lot of things, that questions you can ask yourself and ways to think about things to help you to make decisions. Unfortunately, with decision making, there is no do this, do this, do this, and the answer will be clear, because every situation is different, right? Every person is different. Every team is different. Every business is different. The priorities are different. But some of these questions, these questions can help you to move on. So we've got a few minutes left. What do other people do? Oh, sorry. Hang on just 1 second. Just in December, I just want to remind, in December, on the 15th, Pete's going to be talking about multitasking and distractions and what's going on in the brain with multitasking and distractions. And multitasking is not a thing. You can't actually do it. And why not? And then I'll be talking on the 21st about time management and taking some of what we've talked about today, especially with the prioritizing piece, and help you build some more time management practices and planning practices. So